Gabrielle, how are you?
Oh, it's lovely to see you, Maria. Doing very well. Coming back
Excellent,
out of this last.
excellent, excellent. And actually, I've called you Gabriel. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct. Yes, it's slightly
Fant-
mad. My name's pronounced Gabriel and spelled Gabrielle. No one ever explained why from my parents, but that's what I'm called.
okay, do you have a reason why, or do you just like to be different?
No, my parents just called me that, and that's how it's pronounced. But my friends, I speak French and Spanish, and my friends in France and Spain call say Gabrielle, which sounds so much nicer. So really, I answer to anything.
You answer to anything. Wonderful. Listen, before we get into sort of, some really important topics with you, I really, really need to understand what this obsession and love of ice is all about.
Yeah, I get accused of being an ice addict. There was a time when I was spending a lot of my time going around the world, hanging out with scientists and finding out what was really happening in the whole climate space. But in the process of that, I went many times to Antarctica and to the Arctic. And I have to say, I like my comforts. I do like to be warm, but there is nothing like being in the middle of an entire space where all you can see is ice. It's like being on the moon or Mars or something. I've never felt somewhere so alien and different. And there's no human history there in Antarctica. Whatever you find there is what you take with you, and it can be quite sobering to find out what you see when you look in that massive ice mirror. So I loved it.
Well, do you know what? You're never going to get me out there because I don't even like winter in the UK, and we don't get that cold here, so it's not good for me. I like ice in my gin and tonic. But
Oh, the
anyway,
penguins. They've got penguins. You'd love the penguins.
oh, I'd love the penguins. Fantastic. So, okay, on a more serious note, how long have you been working on climate change, and when and how did you start?
I actually, do you know what? Next year it will be 30 years since I started working on climate change. And it's really quite sobering to think of that. And at the beginning, I was working on science. Basically, I was a climate change editor at Nature. That's how I started in it all. And I did find, when I was doing this stuff, I was going all around the world, hanging out with scientists, finding out what was happening in the climate space. And, there's something that a guy I worked with in Canada told me. He said, some topics, they go from your head. That's very interesting, to your heart. That's very exciting, to your gut, that's really alarming, and then to your soul. And when they go to your soul, you can't get them back out again, you're done. And that sort of happened to me with climate change. I was excited learning all about the science, and I started to get worried. I was working more with policymakers and politicians, and also making radio and TV programs and writing books about it all. And then I began to get worried because I saw climate change already happening everywhere. And then I realized I had to do something about it. And that just coincided with when I started to work with business. Just because people started saying, can you come and talk to my CEO? Can you come and talk to my investor conference? And when I did, I realized this is the lever that could change everything. So ever since then, I've been working exclusively in the private sector, and I'm really feeling more and more heartened by what we can actually do to fix this thing.
I love that. Can you remind me? So that was it: head,
Head,
heart,
heart,
gut,
gut,
and
soul.
soul.
And when it's in your soul, there's no power on God's earth that will get it back out. And that's what happens with climate change. You see it, you get it, you find it interesting, you find it exciting, you find it worrying, and then you've got to do something about it. And I find that many of the senior executives I work with say the same kind of thing. I work with so many CEOs and senior level people in big organizations who say, when I got it, I had to do something. And it's because it's not just good for me, it's not just good for the planet, it's also essential for my business. That's what I hear all the time.
Wow, I love that. It's really powerful. So
Mm.
I'm shocked that you've been doing this for 30 years. You must have started in your nappies because you look fabulous. Anybody watching on video will agree that you're looking fabulous. What's changed in that time? I'm scared to hear the answer, I think,
Yeah.
here. Mm.
Yeah, so I'd say there's two major things that have changed. There's kind of good news and bad news. So I'll start with the bad news of what's changed in that time. So, during that time when I was writing books, making radio programs, TV programs, working with politicians and working in business. During that time, I was giving more and more talks about climate change. This is what's coming. This is what we have to be ready for. In the future, there's going to be mega hurricanes. There's going to be incredible forest fires. There's going to be the sort of temperatures so hot that a village can spontaneously burn down. There's going to be floods, there's going to be sea level rises. I'd say all those things. And it was actually quite hard to find pictures to illustrate it. And these days, it's actually hard to choose.
Oh,
It's just like last week or the week before that village in Canada, that, the temperature was 49.6 degrees C just before it burst into flame and burnt down. And it was interesting. But when I show pictures of the mega hurricanes that we're now experiencing, one guy in a I was speaking to a group of high net worth individuals, retail investors in Toronto. I showed a picture of one hurricane. He came up to me afterwards and he said, no, you should show Hurricane Dorian, the one that just went through the Bahamas. I said, why Hurricane Dorian? He said, well, the thing is, I used to have a house in the Bahamas and I don't anymore. He said it looked like a nuclear bomb had hit it. Wow. And actually, that's not a bad analogy, because the greenhouse gases, the energy we're putting in the atmosphere at the moment is like 4 Hiroshima bombs every second. And so it just flattens everything with that kind of energy in the atmosphere. And he actually, and he said another interesting thing. He said, I used to be a climate skeptic and I'm not anymore. And I'm hearing that a lot as well, as we're actually seeing the actual direct effects of climate change around us. So that's one thing that's changed. It's gone from being something in the future to something that's actually all around us and with us. But also the kind of good news is that in part because of that, I think more and more people have realized that this is actually a direct risk to businesses. So it's a direct risk in terms of if any of your assets, if your buildings, if anything that you depend on in your supply chain is in the way of a flood or a fire or a storm. I mean, when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, it deposited so much rain, it was so intense that the city of Houston actually dropped by a few centimeters. So imagine what happened to all the installations that were there in Houston at the time. So I think more and more investors and also businesses were sort of saying, am I vulnerable? Am I at risk with my supply chain? And investors are saying, this is unpriced risk in our portfolio. We have to do something about this. The insurance companies were first, but I think a lot of the others who were on the front line came next. And now the Bank of England issued a statement basically saying, this is Sarah Breeden at the Bank of England said, climate risks are unpredictable but inevitable. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they're going to affect every consumer and every business in every geography everywhere in the world. So that means when you realize that, it's become mainstream and you have to do something about it. And I think that's been quite a big driver for why the good news is that now climate change has gone from being something on the side that's a little bit tree huggy to something that's right at the heart of the finance sector, and therefore right at the heart of all business plans, because that's where the fire hose of money is being redirected now.
Wow, there's some really shocking information you've shared there. I mean, the one that I wrote down, I thought I couldn't believe it. 4 Hiroshima bombs every second. Every second.
Yeah, that's how much energy we're putting in the atmosphere with the greenhouse gases. It gives you a sense of the scale of it.
Yeah.
And the scale of what we actually have to reverse as well. It's really quite striking.
Yeah,
and you can see the effect. It doesn't, but the Bahamas looked like a nuclear bomb had hit them. They really did.
Yeah, and I didn't know that Houston had dropped, actually. I didn't realize that. But as you say, but as you explain it, and now that it touches business and commerce, things will happen for sure, of course. So yes, that in a way is good news. Are there other risks associated to climate change?
Well, I think that's another of the drivers. Mark Carney, when he was still governor of the Bank of England and when he was chair of the Financial Stability Board, he put it really well. He said that there's a direct risk to assets of climate change that aren't priced, the fires and the floods and the storms. But he also talked about transition risks. And that's because in response to this, we're already right in the middle of a very major transition, the energy transition, changing how we make energy, how we transport things. And so there is a risk that your business model it is no longer fit for purpose, that the value of your assets can actually kind of just slip through your fingers and disappear. And that can come from a reputational change. It can come from legislation or regulations. It can come from a complete change in the demand. And all of those things together can be really, I think, are really troubling to many business leaders. And so there's predictions, for example, that there's going to be some very big policy changes around carbon pricing over the next few years. And if your entire business is predicated on, you can put CO2 into the atmosphere and you don't get charged for that, and suddenly you get a hefty charge on top of what you're already expecting to have to pay, then you can go out of business. I think the governor of the Bank of England and the governor of the Bank of France issued a joint statement. I think this is fascinating. And another big development, which is the race to net zero. So many organizations that are saying we have to have a plan to get to zero emissions by 2050, so that if I emit anything to the sky, I take it back again. There's no net emissions after 2050. And about 18 months ago, it was a bit kind of niche, and now it's everywhere. So, governments are doing it. The UK has legislated it. The European Union is doing it. The US is doing it. South Korea, Japan, all the major, in fact, China as well, all the major economies of the world have said, okay, net zero by 2050. And then organizations, businesses, it's got to the stage where they're calling it the race to zero, but it's got to the stage where if you don't have a net zero target, you're not at the table. And if you're not at the table, you know what? You're on the menu. So that's a really dramatic change from when people weren't even thinking about that. And if we're going to get from where we are now to net zero by 2050, the Governor of the Bank of England and Governor of the Bank of France issued a statement saying what this requires is a 45% reduction in emissions in the next 9 years. Think that. By 2030, in the next 9 years, of 45, almost cutting in half all of the emissions that we're doing now. And that's a dramatic transformation. It's really dramatic. And so there's risks in that, of course. There's risk because if you're not, what the governors of the Bank of England and Bank of France actually said was, first of all, that's going to require a massive reallocation of capital. And secondly, if you don't get with that program, your business will fail to exist. That was their words. And so the risk is that if you're not figuring out where you are on that plan, how you're going to reduce the emissions, if you don't have that net zero target, then you're going to be in trouble with business. But there are opportunities too.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that because you're a very positive person. I mean, we can hear when you speak, you do speak about the positive, and I like that. So I do want to know what the opportunities are.
The thing is that we have to look this in the face. The terrifying climate change is now real and it is now with us. And that's what I do when I'm speaking. I always try to help people to look it in the face, but not in a way where you're kind of shouting or blaming, just saying, this is real. If we're ever going to fix a problem, we have to know what the problem really is. We have to look at it in the face. But once you've done that, we're clever, we're inventive, we're actually brilliant. When we look things in the face and decide what to do about them, we can find the opportunities. And if you think about that, cutting emissions in half by 2030. And in fact, the US has said that they're going to cut their emissions by 50%, not 45%. The European Union has said 55%, and it's about to enshrine that in law. And the UK has said that it will be 78% reduced by 2035. These are huge numbers and massive changes. So just think about it. If you're ready for that and your competitors aren't, you're going to be the winner. But better still, if you're contributing to it, if you're offering solutions, if you're working with your customers and your supply chains to make it happen, the world is your market. Everybody's going to need this. It's like developing a vaccine. Everybody is going to need this. And so I think, that's the kind of mindset that now I think we need to be in. I really don't want to be blaming, I'm not interested in figuring out whose fault it is. We are all in this and we're all part of the solution. And in that context, I think finding how you can contribute and doing it is going to be really profitable as well as very rewarding.
That is exciting. That's really exciting and it's promising. But are we going fast enough, would you say?
No, never going fast enough. And we're doing too little and we started too late. But now at least it's accelerating. I'm speaking to very senior executives who are kind of calling me like, it's going at warp speed. And I say, buckle your seatbelt, it's going to go faster. The Principles for Responsible Investment, is a group of signatories who have a lot of assets under management, something like 50 or 60 trillion under assets under management, and have kind of signed to say that they're going to try and figure out how to make the investments more responsible. That organization brought out a report called The Inevitable Policy Response. And what they're saying is, if you look at all the government's commitments saying we're going to be net zero by 2050, we're going to cut in half by 2030, it's beginning to dawn on many of those governments that their policies won't achieve that. So they're going to do very dramatic, sudden changes when they realize that. And I think, if you're ready for that, if you're looking for it, if you know what to expect, you're going to be in a much better position than if you say, it's all going to go on the way it always has until I suddenly find myself on my face and out of business. And I think those are some of the things that are going to accelerate change. And the events of this year are going to accelerate change as well.
Yes, I can imagine. And in a way, during this sort of last 18 months, we've experienced what it's like to have better air and, less traffic. We've had no planes for months going. I mean, it's just been wonderful. And I sure that the garden smells different, everything is different. It's just nature sort of enjoying it.
It is, and you know what? It's fascinating to me because when 2020 started, I thought that the biggest story of that year was going to be those appalling bushfires in Australia. Do you remember those? I
Yes.
thought that was going to be the story of the year, and then of course COVID came along, and I thought that that would mean that action on climate would slow down. And to my astonishment, it hasn't just not slowed down, it's actually accelerated. And I think a lot of people have taken this as an opportunity to reset. They were thinking at some point in the future, we need to do things differently. Well, we're doing everything differently now, so why don't we just reset now? Some very big organizations have done that. But also I think we've had a sense, almost a visceral sense of what it's like when some of these great big systemic threats actually add up and how big an impact they can have on us personally and how much they can have on the economy. And so I think there's more of a realization of the widespread impact that can have. And also, people used to say to me, well, governments aren't going to make that kind of ridiculous change overnight. I mean, they're not going to do things that will harm the economy. They're not going to ground airplanes, are they? I mean, and what they did.
I know.
And so I think it's changed our minds about what's possible. And it really has, it's kind of also changed our minds about how vulnerable we are and what a global response to something needs to look like. And all of those things have kind of pushed us further in the direction of acting on climate change rather than slowing it down.
It's good to have some positives coming out of the pandemic as well, isn't it? Because it's been tough on everybody, I think, in many ways.
I'll give you another one, actually. I'll give you another one. And it's not so much a positive coming out of the pandemic, but it's just, you said that, you feel like your garden smells different and you feel like, that there was sort of clean air. So one of the things I like to stress in my talks is that when we get this right, it's not just that the world is your market, it's not just that you can make a lot of money, but when we get this right, actually thinking about how we want to live, many of the solutions for climate change also make things better. So for example, electric vehicles. I read, so a couple of days ago, 1 in 10 electric vehicles, 1 in 10 cars being sold in the UK right now is an electric vehicle. That story has completely changed from them being kind of for do-gooders, and they've turned into very desirable cars. But when all the cars are electric vehicles, it's going to be quiet. It's going to be quiet in the cities. You won't have that diesel pollution that you get. You won't have the petrol pollution. So the cities are going to smell lovely. And combined with that, in order to keep buildings not needing so much heating and cooling, and also to be able to have kind of local food sources, there's going to be vertical farms in cities. So imagine that. I live in the middle of London. I love it. But imagine London where it's quiet and it smells like a forest. And there are birds everywhere, and you're still in the city with all of the wonders that the city has. I think we can get ourselves into a mindset where we realize that making solutions to climate change doesn't mean going and living in caves. It means actually living better than we do at the moment. And that's great. It's a big opportunity.
I love that. Although there is one problem with electric vehicles which I've come across. If you're walking along and you've got your AirPods on and you're listening to music, you can't hear them. Yeah, and I've almost come a cropper a couple of times. So you've got to pay attention. You've got to do a green cross code if you're old enough to remember that, and British. That's dating me as well now. Brilliant. And vertical farms, I love that. And the idea that you can be in London and it's quiet and it smells lovely. I hope to see that. I really do hope to see that ASAP.
Honestly, it won't be long. I promise you it won't be long. By 2030, it's going to be illegal to sell internal combustion engine cars in the UK. And there's a massive effort to figure out what to do about trucks and heavier vehicles as well. So, it's going to be much faster than you think.
Great. I love that. So what should we do now?
What should we do now? Well, I think there's a whole bunch of things that we need to do. I mean, now that at last there's this whole renewed focus. I think I've traced this. It started off, as I think I said, with the insurance companies and some of the frontline companies, the energy companies, the oil and gas companies, and then sort of and utilities. But it's kind of moved more or less. The banks are on this now. The asset managers, the asset owners. So with the money, it used to be this kind of dichotomy. It used to be the sense that either we can make money or we can do something about the climate. And it's increasingly clear that trade-off has completely changed. Now, the only way that you're going to succeed in making money is by actually considering the climate. So with that in mind, what should we do now? Well, I think when I'm giving talks, I always tailor them to whoever the audience is. And so there's different specific advice for different organizations, for different people. But basically, everybody should be looking to see how they can get a net zero target and what that can actually look like. And we don't have to have all the answers now. That's the other thing. It's not supposed to happen overnight, but it is supposed to happen faster than it has been. So there's a way to trace. There's a whole set of organizations that are helping figure out exactly what net zero should look like, set a net zero target, work out what your emissions are, and work out what your plan is to reduce those. And not just in your own emissions, but also in your supply chains and with your customers. And there's organizations that you can be part of that can actually help sort of mentor you along that journey. I think this is going to be a very, very interesting year because of COP26. This is a big climate conference that's going to happen in Glasgow in November, and which I will be involved in. And it's the most important one since Paris. So the Paris COP sent a signal around the world saying we're going to try and keep the world well below 2 degrees C in terms of warming. And this one in Glasgow is going to be saying, okay, how are we doing with our commitments, and what do we need to do to change those commitments? How can we ratchet those up? It's the next big event. And I think we're going to see a lot there, not just governments, but also a lot of private sector, a lot of pressure from organizations outside the government saying you have to do this. So that's going to be a very big landmark. Do you know what, in terms of what we should do individually, yes. I was asked this yesterday as a talk I gave, and my biggest piece of advice for what you can do as an individual about helping to fix climate change, it's going to take you by surprise a little bit, I think. It's talk to people you don't agree with about it, and be curious and be open. Because I think we've got ourselves into a lot of this mess by saying, my solution, not yours, my way, not yours, someone's going to shout at me, I'm to blame, you're to blame, who's to blame? Instead of saying, how do we fix it? And you know, it's so much more comfortable and easier to fight amongst yourselves than it is to face something that's actually very frightening. But as I said earlier, if you face it, you fix it. And if you fix it, you live better. And that seems like a good approach to me.
Exactly, very good. Very good approach. I like that. Actually, it wasn't the answer I was expecting. That's really interesting. And I think I think you're right. I think that something coming out of what we've been going through now, certainly, you know, work together to find a solution rather than fighting each other, blaming each other, take responsibility. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can give you some examples. It's super interesting. A friend of mine, Kumi Naidu, who was then the head of Greenpeace International, did a collaboration with Francesco Storacci, a very unlikely bedfellow. He was the head of Enel, an Italian utility that had a lot of coal and fossil fuels in its mix. So why would they even talk to each other, Greenpeace and this kind of fossil fuel entity? That seems very unlikely. But Francesco decided that he wanted to have a plan to get out of fossil fuels, and he wanted to do it right. So he invited Greenpeace to come in and have conversations behind closed doors. They came up with a plan that Greenpeace said, yes, that will work. And then they did a joint press conference, Greenpeace and Enel, joint press conference saying this is what we're going to do. And that's the pattern of the future. I think, you know, I work a lot with NGOs. I'm actually an ambassador for Client Earth, one of the best environmental NGOs out there. And I work with oil and gas companies. I work with every sector, every single sector, the finance sector. I work with energy. I work with transport, shipping, the whole lot. And a lot of what I'm doing in the rest of my life when I'm not speaking is helping people have those conversations, brokering the conversations between the business who can be the delivery arm of the solutions and the NGOs who understand what we actually need to achieve. And the more we can get those conversations happening, the faster we can act. So it's a great time, actually.
Yeah, no, wonderful, wonderful. You've sort of touched on this already, and I'd like you to go a little bit deeper because you said that you tailor your sessions for clients, which is really important as a speaker. So I love that you've said that. What are clients generally asking you to speak about? Because obviously, if you've got a keynote, you've got a limited amount of time. What are they hoping to have as an outcome from one of your speeches?
I think the thing that I get asked most, I mean, people want to know what are the big trends, what's actually driving them, what's happening, what are other sectors doing that we can learn from, what's happening in the investor space, what's happening in the policy space, so that it can be right up to the minute. And so one of the reasons I always tailor my talks is that things are happening so fast that, you know, so I'm very often saying, and yesterday and last week, and this just came out, or this headline or this law, to make sure that it's really up to the minute. But another thing that they're often asked, as well as kind of the big picture, is kind of, can you paint the big picture of how we understand why we're in this place, what's actually happening in other sectors, policy, etc. And then what's specific to our sector? What do we need to know about our sector? And then what can we do as a company? So it tends to be that kind of arc. And what they most often ask for, and certainly, I mean, I'm happy to say what they most often say at the end is that they go away feeling very empowered and inspired. And so I don't pull any punches. I really show the hurricanes and the floods and the fires. I show what's real and what's happening. But what I also try to do is show, and therefore this is what we do about it. And you know, it's lovely to hear, but I'm not there to shout at anyone. I'm there to empower us all to fix this, because that's going to be the answer, right?
Absolutely. And actually, I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak live. And
Oh.
for me, it was an emotional roller coaster, but you do come out thinking, okay, I can do something here, rather than feeling helpless and hopeless. So, and yeah, you don't pull any punches. It's absolutely true. But then again, I like people like that. So that's fine. Fantastic.
I do try to make everyone laugh as well. If I haven't got at least a few laughs by the end of my talk, then I don't feel I've done it right. So that's
good.
You've got to have fun doing it.
We have to have fun. Yeah. So you also touched a little bit on this. So obviously, apart from your speaking, you also help companies. You broker the the conversations between different organizations. How else do you help them? Do you go in and work with companies more deeply too?
Yes, I do. I have a couple of different teams that I do this with, that I put together, and so we do strategic advice and usually at senior executive level on aspects of this. I tend to focus my work on the companies. If it's an individual company, it's because they're a very big influencer in that sector, because we're trying to make change as well as make a living. And also with organizations that are kind of have cross-sectoral collaborations that bring in lots of different players and make something happen that they couldn't do individually. Got a lot of experience about how to make collaborations happen. But I think most often my team and I are there to hold up a kind of an entertaining but uncomfortable mirror and that can be to everyone. We can hold up an uncomfortable mirror to Greenpeace as much as we can hold up an uncomfortable mirror to an oil and gas company. And so we're there to say, this is what we hear, this is what you have to see. And we do that quite a lot as a kind of one-on-ones. And then I'm also, my team and I were working with the UN high-level champions for the COP meeting in Glasgow to figure out what are the big blind spots, what are the missing pieces, and how can businesses contribute to solving those. And so that's a very specific, focused effort. And we're particularly looking around the area of carbon capture and carbon removals. I think this is going to be a very exciting area. Taking CO2 back out of the sky is going to be hugely important. And I don't think enough people have realized. John Kerry mentioned it at the event that Joe Biden called in the spring. He said, I really don't think people have got their heads around this. And I think he's right. So we're going after some of the areas where everyone knows about electric vehicles, everyone knows about solar power, everyone knows about now even about net zero, but people haven't quite figured out yet. We're also going to have to do these things. So I think it's most interesting, and you can have the most impact if you go after the blind spots that other people haven't seen yet.
Fantastic. I think you answered my last question. I was going to ask you what you're currently working on, but so to sum up, if there's anything else you want, in fact, what would you like to leave us with? What thoughts would you like to leave us with?
Well, in what I'm currently working on, I mean, I'm tremendously excited by this year. And I'm excited by the work we're doing on removals, but on the whole climate space and how it all fits together. I'm going to be giving a TED Global talk about this in October. It's the first time TED Global has done a conference entirely dedicated to climate change. It's going to be really, I think, important. So I'm hugely excited that I'm going to be speaking at that. And they've also asked me to curate one of the breakout sessions around the topics that I'm covering too, so that we can really kind of dig into that. So that's going to be really great, and the COP meeting. So I suppose I'd leave you with it's hugely important to look climate change in the eye. It is the mega trend. I speak about lots of different aspects of it. So, and related aspects, plastics, circular economy, the role of finance. But the big picture thing is, this is the mega trend. And this is affecting everything else. And so it's important to look it in the eye and see it the way it really is, to get educated about it. And it's also important to feel inspired and encouraged and think, how am I going to lead my company out of this in a way that's going to make us even more valuable when it comes through to the middle of the 21st century. And so, don't just be afraid, be excited. This is a very, very exciting time to be alive.
Wonderful. What a lovely place to leave it. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Totally. I always love speaking to you, Maria.
Wonderful. Well said. I'll pay you later. So thank you for listening to The Speaker Show. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on iTunes. You can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or on iTunes, Google Podcast, or your favorite podcast app. And Gabrielle is available for bookings via speakersassociates.com. So I'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now and take care. Thank you.